Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma. Today's topic is meditation. Welcome to the Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kisma, bringing you ancient wisdom for modern day success so that you can sparkle just a little bit brighter each and every day. If what you hear speaks to your soul, go ahead and give us a rating and a review in iTunes. You can also find us on SoundCloud and Stitcher. And hey, if there's somebody in your life that you think would enjoy this podcast, go ahead and share it with them. Well, hey there, Nick. What's going on?
Talking about meditation tonight.
We are.
Big topic.
Yeah.
Deep topic. Very cool topic.
It is. A lot of people love to meditate. And I think a lot of people out there have been almost nervous to meditate, thinking, they might get a little love, light, and clueless. But, we picked this topic because we've been studying meditation for years. We haven't been meditating for years.
Well,
technically,
yeah. So I think really the biggest point that we'd like to bring to this podcast is to provide some clarity around what meditation actually is, which, would seem simple, like because to most people, the understanding is like, oh, I'm just going to close my eyes and be quiet. But there's actually more to it than that. It's not so simple. So we want to bring some clarity as to what exactly meditation is and isn't, some of the preparatory steps for it, and then how to actually do it.
And let's just start off with a little disclaimer. We are in no way criticizing your means of directing your thought flow to a single pointed focus. If it's working for you, awesome.
Yeah, and do you, but I think it's really helpful to understand what is actually going on here and what the purpose of meditation is. Right. So, and it's important also because a lot of people are doing it. A lot of people are meditating. So
companies are meditating. CEOs are meditating.
Sports teams, kids.
Yeah. Well, we did a little research, and according to the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, apparently 8% of Americans meditate. That's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people.
It's a growing interest. Even doctors recommend it for lowering stress. And like you said, sports teams do it and the whole shebang.
And they're doing a lot of studies on it now, of medically,
studies.
Like what happens to the brain and the body and what it does for your health. And they're finding like all kinds of really amazing results, which is like no big surprise. However, this is where the conversation really starts to broaden out because they're using all sorts of different techniques and studying these different techniques and trying to get actual quantitative results to back it up. So I think that's a part where what is awesome as I think it actually muddies the waters a little bit because it makes it less clear what meditation is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It totally does. So let's start here. Is meditation a practice? I hear a lot of people, you should get into the practice of meditation. You should practice meditation. Is it actually a practice?
It is not.
So what does that mean?
It's not something that you practice. That's really what it means. It's something that meditation is a naturally occurring phenomenon.
Ooh.
When you have eradicated the mass of desires that are pulling your mind in every which way. Like when you're dealing with meditation, you're dealing with the mind, and the mind is basically conditioning the purity of your conscious awareness and how you perceive the world. So if you think about it, the best way to think about it is like a movie, right? And you've got a movie camera and there's film. So you got this pure white light and then it flashes through the film. And so what you see on the screen is conditioned light.
Yes.
It's conditioned by the film. Okay. So that's your mind. And so the pure, getting that out of the way, let's put it this way. You got a picture on the camera that's super chaotic and there's everything everywhere and you just don't even know where to look to take in what you're supposed to take in.
Sounds scary.
Right? So, and that's most people's minds.
Yes. Chaotic, frenetic, many, many, many different directions.
Going in a lot of different directions. Whereas if you look at a really well-crafted scene or set, the director knows exactly where to direct your attention. You know exactly where to look on the screen.
Yes.
Right? So that is basically like being the director of your mind.
Oh, being the director of your mind. Yes.
To, know where and know and have the ability to consciously direct your focus and attention towards a specific thing, right? So people get into distraction, the Facebooks are everywhere. You can get just lost in that. You get into procrastination where your mind just kind of wanders off, and then you're like, oh, you start to make excuses. You try to do like 20 different things at once, and your mind doesn't know where to go with that. And so you wind up really tired and really burned out. Like, it is no wonder to me that people turn to meditation because they're like, I can't freaking do this.
Yeah.
I need to like focus my mind.
Yeah,
right.
I remember years ago when I first heard someone speak about meditation differently than what I thought it was, because I thought I was like, I'm meditating, I'm super cool. And really, guys, I could last like maybe 5 minutes, and still within that 5-minute period, I was thinking about a lot of things. But it was Gautam Jain who came to our yoga studio, and he just laid down his opinion of meditation. And I remember it was the funniest thing. He's like, you know what, you guys, you sit there and you go, Om, and you go, Om. And then soon enough, you're like, I wonder what's going on at home. Like, who's making lunch or dinner? The mind just leaves so quickly.
Yeah, it just slips out so fast.
Yeah.
And that is like, there's nothing wrong with that. That is the nature of the mind.
Yeah.
And when you look at that quality within your mind, if you want to like straighten that out, it requires clearing to get, to clear out all the discombobulation and all the discordance that's happening in the mind.
So basically, to get back to this, why meditation is not a practice, we are removing obstacles in order for our mind to be able to focus on one point.
Yep.
So it is essentially an arrival. Your mind and your being arrives to the state of meditation because of all the things that you've done previously to be able to remove those obstacles, remove lower desires that aren't really going to serve you, and to have a presence. Would that be correct?
That is correct.
An arrival point. That's pretty cool.
It's a naturally occurring phenomenon.
So again, we were listening to another lecture on meditation not too long ago, and I thought this was brilliant. The teacher said, if you're having to try to meditate, you're not ready. And he compared it to like a salesman back in the day when we had door-to-door salespeople coming up, and a really pushy salesperson would knock on the door and you'd open it and you're like, no, I don't really want any of those fuller brushes or whatever. And the salesperson would stick their foot in the door. Like, well, wait a minute, what about, don't you need a toothbrush or something? So the more they forced, the more we were like, no, I don't want that. Close the freaking door. As opposed to someone who is really engaging and in a conversation and inquires, and all of a sudden you're enraptured with this person and you want what they have to fix your problem. So he was like, if there's a thought that's coming in while you're meditating and you have to work really, really hard to get it out and there's resistance, you are not ready to meditate.
Yeah, just stop, like save yourself the frustration.
Yeah, because it does create frustration and confusion.
Yeah. So I think if we talk about, we probably kind of like kill two birds with one stone if we talk about the process and then where people stop along that. So I think does that
go for it.
Let's do that. So the first part is what meditation is and isn't, right? Mm-hmm. So we're talking about really just the absolute convergence of the mind on a single thought, a single point of focus, right? Mm-hmm. And to do that, like one of the first things people talk about is like let's say they're in their yoga practice or they're playing their sport or whatever, they're doing something like that. And then it's like they're just so absorbed with that they step into a state of flow, and this is called meditation. Mm-hmm. So this activity, the activity of the body that you become so absorbed with it,
yes,
that everything else just kind of washes out. And they're like, I'm in a meditative state.
Right.
Well, I understand that. Like, I understand why you would say that. And the first step, right, is like a physical activity. You have to soothe the ailments in your body and the discomfort in your body so that you can actually sit comfortably.
Right.
Right. So moving your body is actually a really important part of that. And when people become so absorbed in that, then they make that the thing. Like, I'm going to get to my meditative state through running. And that, like, yes, I get it, but not, because you're still in that thing. And I know that it's a repetitive movement when you're running. It's a repetitive thing that lets your mind kind of unwind all of these different
processes. The unconscious
processes.
starts to connect with the higher self.
Well, yeah. And it starts, and it works out. Like you just work out some of those things. It's like dreaming in a certain way where you're just working out some of the unconscious things there and just getting them out, and working them out like literally through your body. And that's really important because it sets you up and it does start to clear some space.
Right.
And it moves your body. Your body needs to be flexible enough and stable enough to be able to hold the meditative position to actually sit and meditate,
ponder, yes.
without being like, oh, my hip,
Right. Or my knee.
My knee.
I got to crack my back. Oh my God. I got to go to the bathroom.
Yeah. I mean, that's really important. So that physical activity is really part, but that's part where a lot of people stop and they just make it all about that. And I find my meditative space through yoga or through running or through whatever it is,
Yeah, it's interesting when you bring that up because I would equate that back when I would practice flute. Like I'd be so focused on what I was practicing that I wouldn't hear anything else. Like somebody could be knocking on the door, but I was so focused. I'd never refer to that as a meditative state. I'm just focused on what I'm doing right then and there.
And that's exactly what it is. That's concentration.
Concentration.
Yeah. So concentration is not meditation.
Although you need to concentrate on a single thought form to be in the state of meditation.
Exactly. So let's talk about the big reason why it's not meditation. And here's the big reason why it's not meditation is because you're focused on the external.
Okay.
You're focused on the world, right? If you're running, you're focused on the running or you're focused on your thoughts and they're clearing out or whatever. It's still focused on the world.
Yeah.
You're focused on your flute, right? Of the world. You're focused on your yoga
pose or whatever.
Whatever it is,
It's an external.
It's an external thing, and meditation is purely turned internally.
Right. So there's nothing wrong with all these activities.
No, they're
in fact,
awesome.
These activities are great. This is one reason, in ancient times, people would do asana, the physical practice of yoga, before they sat and received a spiritual teaching because they had to work things out of their body like you talked about.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's just get that's where that stops. You're still focused on the world.
Yes.
And that's cool. But that is not the purpose of meditation. Meditation is to take you to the highest, to truly take you to your potential, so to speak, to know who you really are.
To consciousness, really.
And you're not going to find that through a flute.
Right. Or running.
You might find a piece of that, a facet of it, but you will never find the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it.
So there's that one. Okay. Next is breathing. So the breathing exercises are prescribed. So you work your body and then you work into a more subtle layer, which is your breath. So there's all tons of breathing exercises. We teach a really simple and powerful breathing pattern that does amazing things for your body and your energy. And that again helps to calm your body and set the frame for your mind.
Right.
So your mind has a chance to settle down. Okay. So this is where it gets a little tricky because you see a lot of it in the yoga world, but this is also in stress release courses and all over the place. They teach breathing.
Right.
So you learn, we're going to do some breathing now, do some deep breathing. And it helps. It really does help. Why? Because it grounds you back in your body and it gives your mind a focal point. I'm going to focus on my breathing, right? And so then instead of going off in all the million different directions, like it would if you're having like a panic attack or if you have anxiety or if you're just like overwhelmed with whatever, that bringing it back to a focal point, it gives something for your mind to grab onto. And then from there, it naturally starts to settle. Okay. So then you breathe and then it does wonderful things for your energy body as well. Moving that subtle energy through your meridian system through a directed breathing process.
Right. So that kind of breathing, whether it's, as you described, some of the processes we use, any kind of pranayama, it is not controlling the mind, but it's allowing the natural state of peacefulness to arise.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So this is really important, everyone, and it's a little glitchy to wrap our heads around. We hear it, like Nick said, we hear it time and time again, breathe and control your mind and breathe. And the breath will, and here's the thing, each of us has a different base state that we'll get to. So it's giving us an opportunity to get to that most peaceful base state that we can, the most neutral place we can. So if someone is highly agitated and they're doing breathing as opposed to Nick, who's pretty blissed out, Nick is going to get at a base place that's different from the highly agitated person.
Exactly.
But the breathing is an opportunity to find that state. It is not controlling.
Right. The breath doesn't control the mind. The mind controls the breath.
The mind controls the breath, because think about it. You got to actually think in order to be like, okay, I'm going to take a purposeful long inhale for 6 counts. That's not the basic autonomous breath that we do to stay alive. This is, I am directing the length of my breath with my mind.
Exactly. And your mind, say your mind gets distracted or your mind gets overwhelmed, your breathing is naturally affected by that, right? So people misunderstand and think like, oh, if I breathe deep, I'll control my mind. But it's actually the opposite. It's
actually giving your mind something to focus on and allowing that state to arise.
Exactly. So I know that this, I can just almost hear it right now. Like, it's so nitpicky. Like, does it really matter? Actually, it does. Because if you don't understand these pieces and the process to it, then you don't know what does what.
Okay.
And does that make sense? And,
totally.
And then you think that breathing is calming your mind, and it's actually your mind that's calming your breathing, and you're using then your breath as a tool to set the stage so that you can be more focused and more clear.
Think Pulp Fiction, right?
I do not understand that reference.
Yeah. Okay, never mind.
Pulp Fiction.
Wasn't there that place where she was moving her toe?
Oh no, that was
what was that?
Oh, that was Kill Bill. That was
Kill Bill.
That was totally Kill Bill.
And she's like
same character,
staring at her toe.
Move. And she knew that's a great example, actually.
Thank you.
Is because she was there, she was paralyzed, and she
Uma, right? Uma Thurman's
exactly
character,
the bride,
yeah,
and she focused on one thing. She's like,
a toe.
I'm going to do all this, and I'm going to go get Bill, and I'm going to do this and this and this, and I'm going to get revenge on everybody. But right now, I need to move my toe.
Yeah.
Move that toe.
Move it.
So, great example. Like, wow, where'd that come from?
Just popped in.
Yeah.
So many things do.
They do. It's a good example, right?
Yeah.
The mind is controlling that. Right?
Yeah.
The mind decides. So that comes back to then, this is where a lot of people stop, is just the breath meditation. I think Vipassana teaches this pretty specifically. I haven't studied that intensively. I would never, ever do a 10-day sit. I just would never do that.
Yeah.
But
bless you, those of you that do that.
I'm pretty amazed by people that can. But typically the pattern that I see is that like they're super blissed out. They have some amazing insights, which is so cool. I think that's so amazing. But then they get back into the world and things start to kind of close in on them, and they start to become more,
energetically,
stressed out.
It can create some issues.
Yeah, it can definitely do some things like that. But again, nothing wrong with it. Like if it works for you, awesome, man. Like do it, enjoy it. But understand that you're still, you're focusing on the breath. What is the breath? It's external, actually.
Yeah.
It is not, the internal is not the highest. Right? Good. And this is a place also where other people will then just focus on their mind. So the next step is to what you would institute after that is a chant.
Okay.
Right? Which is the only one that makes sense is Om.
And let's talk about Om for a few moments, because being the one that makes sense, it's universal, right? It's a sound. It creates a resonance within the body, and it is just representative of the highest sound and symbol that there is.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the language of your higher self, right?
Correct.
So like light, color, sound and symbol. So this is where there's chanting practices, of course, where people chant different chants for different purposes and things like that. Om is used again because it's subtle. Like you can only contact it with one of your senses. You can't see it, you can't taste it, you can't feel it, you can only hear it. So the sound is the most subtle of those, and it acts as a focal point for the mind to converge upon, that leads you to the higher, because that represents the highest, that represents the ultimate, so to speak.
Right.
So rather than that, so one of the techniques that I think goes off with this one is TM, Transcendental Meditation.
Yeah, I used to be a little TMer. Your
I did,
eyes
yeah.
would get all glassy.
I'm glad I stopped that. They use their technique. They do use a mantra, but it is deliberately meaningless. So it has no meaning to it. And honestly, to me, that is what renders the meditation meaningless.
Okay.
And really, you meditate for a purpose. You don't meditate for no reason. You meditate with a very specific purpose in mind. And so people go off the rails when they're like, I'm going to meditate on that. I got a problem. I'm going to meditate on that problem.
Yeah, don't meditate on the problem.
Don't do that. Like, if you're going to do that, like, meditate on the solution.
Exactly.
Like definitely don't meditate on the problem, because you're just going to make it bigger.
The big freaking magnet that's going to attract more of those kinds of problems into your world. This is one of the misconceptions that I've seen all the time. I'm going to meditate on this issue. Guess what? It's a magnet, and you're attracting bigger and more of those issues. So stop that.
Right. And another one is you're basically meditating on your mind. You're observing your thoughts, right? Which cool. Like it kind of comes back to that. Like your thought, like that is what your mind does. It naturally produces thoughts, a little thought factory, choom, and they just keep flowing and flowing and flowing. So when you meditate on that, you're basically just observing your mind, which is cool. Like, again, you can get really interesting insights as to how your mind functions, what you think, which is going to give you insight into a deeper layer of your personality, but you're still focused on a layer of yourself that is not the highest.
Right.
And ultimately, your mind is part of the world.
Yes.
So that's
part of the world.
It's part of the world. That's really important to understand. And that's where, I like, again, like some of this might seem like nitpicky, but it's important to understand step by step by step what's happening and what is what. And the mind is part of the world. So if you're just meditating on your thoughts, you're just watching your thoughts.
And let me just interject. If you want to look at what your mind's thinking, awesome, do it. I mean, it's fascinating when I sit down and look at what flows through this head. I'll tell you that right now. But I don't really change. I don't get a whole lot out of it. Then this is really interesting. Can I slow my thoughts down? Yes, because I practice doing that. But it is not the same kind of connection to source, to consciousness that I would get if for even 30 seconds I contemplated the highest. I could spend an hour looking at my thoughts and kind of get blissed out and maybe feel really chill. But 30 seconds contemplating the highest is going to be way more inspiring and create way more results.
Yeah, and your spiritual connection, your spiritual cord, and your basically just your overall field becomes much bigger when you attach to the higher, like, because that's really the idea. So there's that piece, and there's all kinds of methods around this, where you meditate on your thoughts. You just observe them, and I think, like, what I was going to say is that, like, your mind just naturally produces that,
right?
And so if your intention is to focus on the highest, if you're using the mantra Om and just sound silence, like that's what the intellect does. It's like, here's the sound, here's the silence.
It's observing the sound, it's observing the silence, the intellect. It's observing the sound of Om, it's observing the silence in between the Oms.
Exactly, because what's the role of the intellect is to discern
what is real, right? And what is not real.
Exactly. So it's looking, it's basically just discerning. It's not even like trying to do anything to the spaces. It's just noticing sound, silence. Right. And so as your mind naturally produces thoughts, that's where you were mentioning before, like gently dismiss, like you just gently dismiss the thoughts, like just, okay, and then back to it. And, but if you have to, like, get out of here, if you're getting like, stop it. Like, don't do that, because you're going to frustrate yourself.
Right.
And your mind really is your mind's too agitated to do that. Right. Like, you should go do some action, you should move your body, and you should do some other things until your mind can become more calm, and then you'll have an easier go of it.
Great. So to recap that, if you're meditating and you're on Om silence, and these little thoughts come in and you're able to be like, just gently go away, back to Om, you're doing pretty good. But if these thoughts come knocking at the at your head, like, hey, and you're like getting frustrated. And the more you have to work to get those thoughts out, it's not the best possible setup.
Well, what it will create if you continue with that is it will create frustration over time.
Yeah.
You'll get frustrated with it.
Yeah.
And like, I'm always just about the path, like, why fight it? Just path of least resistance. If that's really happening in your brain, no problem. Just go, work out, do some yoga, go for a run, move your body, do a little breathing, set, to reset the stage, and then sit down and try again.
Right.
And see how it goes. Because they did that. What was that experiment where they gave people a button and they said, you're going to concentrate on this one thing. Whenever you slip off,
yes,
hit the button. And it was self-directed, though. Like, they obviously couldn't, at the time when they did this experiment, they couldn't tell what was going on in somebody's head. So it's like, there's some people are like, oh, I only hit the button once. That's great, but you were checked out for like 14 of the 15 minutes, and then you notice.
Like all of a sudden, I dropped off.
Yeah, you don't notice when your mind slips off. You just, then until you gain the awareness of like, oh, my mind slipped off. But when you're between when your mind slips off and when you have the awareness that your mind slipped off, there's the gap. Right. And then you're just in Neverland of whatever your mind is doing.
So this is why when a human is chanting silently or out loud Om, they often use what's called the mala beads.
Yep.
Oh,
Train of
truth. Well, that's going to get you to slip off your meditation. I'll tell you that right now. That's why I quote unquote meditate in the other room. Quote unquote. So here are these beads. There's usually 108 beads in a guru bead. And the idea is with every Om, the thumb moves to the next bead. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. And then if a person who is Oming, meditating, drops off, there's going to be like a little jerk, which gets them back into place and like, okay, next bead, Om, Om. And it's the use of something physical to keep track and keep yourself on point with the ohms.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a little something to keep you honest, keep you in check with that. And people will use the same malas to chant, to different, different deities, their Ganesh chants, Shiva chants. But, they don't have to be that. Like you could just chant, I am this, I am, and any other number of things, that's what that's for. It's to track the number that you do for that. And you do the sacred number of 108 is the idea. And then you can start, if you're going to do that, you can chant out loud first, just chant it out loud. You don't have to do it in your head because you think about it like that's more gross. It's more substantial for you to actually chant physically the sound. It's easier for your mind to grab onto. As you get into your thoughts, right, or to do it silently, the mind's a little more slippery, right? It starts to kind of like slip off, or and all these little things. It's just more subtle, right? Yeah. So, like again, there's no right or wrong. You're wherever you are with this, and your mind is doing whatever it's doing. Just meet your mind where it's at, and do what you can do, right? So if you're chanting it out at the top of your lungs, freaking chant it out. It's awesome.
Okay. So before we give some tips, because I believe we have some tips for those of you that are like, but I want to meditate. I want to get to the real point of meditation, which is to exit the non-real world and enter the real world, meaning self-actualization, self-realization, popping into that.
Well, what if we didn't look at it as the world? And what if we looked at it as just truly identifying with your highest nature? Yes. Like, I think that'd be easier because then we get into the whole illusion thing. And that's that's just.
But it really is a different state.
Madness. Yeah.
So with every desire that drops off, a human who is doing this meditation and is seeking the self-realization, the idea is they have one desire left. And that is to be self-realized, self-actualized. I'm getting really lofty here and talking absolute. So don't let it shake you up and freak you out. But think about it. Somebody who's that disciplined, that's their last desire. And the moment they let go of that desire, they pop into self-realization.
Yeah. And that's so they say. Like,
so they say.
So they say.
We're not there.
I just think about it like this. I think we talked about this in a recent episode of like self-development, self-realization, same path. Same thing.
path,
Like
yeah.
you're doing the same thing. So just do what you
living
do
your
where
best,
you're at.
living your best. Living your best right here and now.
Yeah, and actualizing your potential. So if you just think about that and your highest, and this is a bridge to help you embody that. Like that's really the idea.
Right.
And so, just to, that's really that's the crux of it,
Yeah.
and your
That is.
mind converges on that single desire. And that's the last desire. And ironically, it's that desire that you have to let go of in order to cross over. So they say.
Right. So they say.
So I don't
One
even
of those stories, real quickly, one of those stories back from the day of ancient teachings, there was a famous archer who went to a guru and was like, what do I do? And he's like, go spend a year developing your technique. Be the master archer. Because really, this archer had two main desires. He wanted to be self-actualized, but he wanted to be this great archer. And that came first. So he sent him out, practice. He came back. And he was like, okay, I'm the best in the land. What do I do now? And the guru was like, give me your thumb, cut off your thumb. And the moment that happened, that desire dropped and he went into self-realization.
Yeah, the thumb cutting story always freaks people out.
It kind of freaks. Yeah,
But
freaks me out.
if you recognize that the thumb is the representation of his desire for archery,
yeah. And that was it.
and that was
really.
the only desire
thing
that he
he
had, like that was it.
Left in the world.
Yeah. So then we remove that. He has no desire to be an archer now. He has no desires left. Boom.
Yeah.
But this is where, we get into a whole other weird part of this where it's like desire becomes the enemy and all this stuff.
It's not the enemy.
It's not, man.
Yeah.
Like just you have desires. Like use your desires to move efficiently and effectively in this world and do something awesome here.
Yeah.
Like that's it. Like all this weird spiritual talk about like you have to eradicate your desires and yada, yada,
be
yada.
poor and all that stuff.
Like,
don't do that.
Don't do that. Like,
Yeah.
stop that. Like, just like you have desires, use them in a really positive way to direct yourself toward your highest, towards your full potential.
Your highest and best.
Yeah, that's
awesome.
it. That's really it. So then there's this whole other category of like guided meditations.
Yeah.
Right. And so those are like, I have one of these.
I have
Right?
several that I love.
Yeah. And I have one, that I
he's
put out
got
there.
one.
Yeah.
Right, you have one. Nick
yeah.
created this awesome guided meditation.
It's awesome. It's based on an ancient process, and I call it a meditation because that's what people would know it as.
Right.
If I called it what it really is, which is like a guided process, guided full potential process, yada yada yada, like they'd be like, dude, what's that? But it's like full potential meditation, right?
Yeah.
So, and that it's a process that takes you through guided step by step of how to connect with your full potential, and then how to embody that. And also, really to embody that, and then also to use healing energy and get a downpour and a download from your higher self.
Oh, and that's awesome because you know what, everyone? When you get the answers and the downloads from your higher self, it is so cool.
Right.
And that's just part of the process of the arrival to meditation. So basically, Nick, this guided meditation of yours is a little bit of a fast track because we're helping along. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that for sure. And a lot of guided meditation process will attempt to do that in some way. Like they guide you through not meditation, right? It's just a purely speaking, you can get into semantics around it, but purely speaking, it is not a meditation. It's a process. It's a guided process.
Yes.
But it'll be called a meditation. And that's exactly what that's designed. That's how I set that one up to be, is like basically like it does all the right things in all the right orders to connect you with your full potential so that you can really embody that and then actually receive a download of information from your highest to help you be awesome in the world.
I love it. We'll put a link in the show notes. Do we know a link for the meditation?
sourcemovement.com/meditate.
Okay, it'll be in the show notes.
It'll be in
Super
the show,
cool.
yeah.
Very reasonable. Okay, awesome. So hopefully that was a little bit of a clarifying moment for meditation.
Yeah, I imagine there'll be some questions about that. So
email us.
info@sourcemovement.com. We're really enjoying the question segment of the show, and from the feedback that we've gotten from people, they're really getting a lot out of it too, because now we have this dialogue going.
Yeah, and we have a question for tonight.
We do have a question. Let me bring it up here.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I bet this question was going through many minds. So I'm glad this person wrote in. It was about that episode of the need to be right.
Right. The need to be right episode. I knew that one would bring up a few different questions. It's a big topic, and it gets a little bit gets a little funny sometimes. Why? Usually because you get stuck in the need to be right. Ironic, right? So really the question is, to boil it down, I'm not going to read the whole question. It was asking about, you had the marketing guy kind of derailed, or you let him derail you, and then you decided to stick with your original plan. And basically, and one of the questions around that was like, well, isn't that the need to be right?
I love that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we might have talked about that a little bit, but it's worth it to go back into it a little bit and to just really dive in and pick that apart.
And because also the second part of the question is, how do you know the difference between the need to be right and getting information from your higher self? Like, how do you know when you're in the need to be right, or you're making decisions in alignment with divine right order in your higher self? And I think that's just a really great question. So for me, what happened is I felt it in my body. I actually did change my plan because I was like, oh, well, this guy's super smart. I'm going to rewrite my copy and set up a webinar, and I'm going to talk about mindset. And I felt it viscerally in my body. I got almost sick.
Right. And to me, the need to be right around that was, I need to be right that somebody else knows better than I.
Exactly. So I was definitely in the need to be right at one level. And then I woke up and I was like, oh, I'm going to talk about what I'm supposed to talk about. And it's been great because I'm doing all these soul clearings and readings with people, and they're having great results, and it's amazing. I love doing it. I would never have people register for soul reading and clearing if I was talking about mindset.
Yeah, no way. Now,
having to say that, because if I were to only talk about that, it would be the need to be right, that I've got to say it this way. There are how many people out there that are interested in evolving and letting go of stress and really living their life in alignment with their life's purpose, their life's, like, they're seeking, but they're not really aligned with the word soul. So I think for a whole different segment, I can talk about it differently, but still guide them to the same path.
The answer is always the same. Like, you have to know who you are at a soul level. You must understand your soul identity, because everything grows out of that. But how you get to that conversation,
exactly.
That as long as you get there, right? But the need to be right around, like, and you can use the need to be right to create a stubbornness and an overconfidence of I know better and I got this, or you can use it in the opposite way to create insecurity, which is to say, like, I need to be right that everybody else knows more than I do, and I need to be right that everybody else knows better.
Right.
So it's getting stuck in that, in those different places.
So I guess we could wrap it up by saying the need to be right is a stuckness that is like permeating decisions and thoughts and actions to the point where a human doesn't even know if they are making decisions with their higher self, or they're just in the need to be right.
Yep. Yeah. And really holding on to that.
Yeah.
You really
like
hold on to it.
In.
Yeah. Because letting go of it would mean a new identity for yourself.
Yeah.
I just ran across a really good one. Need to be right that, what is it? I need to be right that getting by is just good enough. Like just enough to get by. That's all good, right? So that'll keep you in, like, I'm fine.
Yeah, but
kind
limit your potential and your growth. I mean, the design of the original human is not to just get by; it's to freaking rock it.
Yeah. So exactly, and this goes beyond, because that was another part of the question was, is it
a limiting belief?
Is it just a limiting belief? Yes, it is. Limiting beliefs are definitely part of this, but it's the way that you hold on to those beliefs and the way that they dig their heels in, and your conscious or unconscious effort to reinforce those limiting beliefs.
Yes.
So
because of the need to be right.
Because of the need to be right.
Where if that need to be right wasn't there, you'd be busting through those limiting beliefs and seeing the potentiality and the possibility of so many things.
Right. If you just step away from it and be like, oh, is that so? I wonder what. I wonder what if, like, let me really tune in with myself. So that part of like, how do you know if it's your higher self, or how do you know like what, like what's your biggest tip for that? Like you described how you felt it in your body. Like what do people do about that?
Yeah. I mean, hop on one of our webinars, because we teach a lot about how to read the energy signature of the higher self, if it's a yes or a no. But basically, go inward. It's dialing it back to the meditation. Go inward. It is not the external world that will tell you, it is your inner self, and get to know your inner truth, because you will hear it or you will feel it.
Yeah. You're higher.
Or you'll see the results in your world. So if you're making decisions that you think are in line with your higher self, but your world is chaotic, you're not, right? So internal equals external. Your internal map is like creating this carbon copy in your external world. And that's really a significant way to understand if you're in flow with your higher self.
Yeah. And that's really good. Yeah. The other way that I think about it that's really helpful for me is your higher self will never limit you.
Never limit you. That's great. Your higher self will never limit you.
Right. So the limitation there of like, you can't talk about this, people won't get it or whatever, or people don't want to talk about that or whatever that was. Like that's limitation.
It is limitation.
It's not to say there's not validity to it and there's not a bridge to it. But ultimately, if your soul's calling you to do something, you need to go do it. So a lot of times where people will get into that one, I see that a lot is like, I really want to, I really want to do this program, but I can't do it. I can't invest the money. And my higher self is telling me now is not the time.
Yeah.
Dude, if your higher self is going to be like, now is the time.
Yeah. Figure it out. Go do it.
Yeah. It's like, now is the time. And it's a limiting thought, like, because time doesn't exist to the higher self, just so that you know. But that kind of limitation, or I can't do that. My higher self is telling me no. That's one to probably do a little inquiry around. Because then you'll get stuck in the need to be right of like, I can't, or you can divinize your own mind in the name of your higher self.
Oh my gosh.
So that is to say, like, you just now suddenly made your higher self God, except you're not listening to your higher self. You're listening to the limitations of your mind.
Yeah. All right. A whole nother podcast.
That's another podcast. Did I take it off a little bit?
I think you took it off.
Sorry about that. But that's the nutshell there. Yeah.
All right, everyone. Let us hear from you. Yes. info@sourcemovement.com. Thank you as always for listening and joining us. We love you very much.
Namaste.
Namaste.